I do believe, I know I was just complaining about the face cams or, waxing poetic about it, whatever. But the dedicated servers, I think, is the biggest hurdle. I think that especially for people on the West Coast, you guys were talking about it offline before we got on the show here. That's probably primary concern, to at least try to get to a position where we are in a fair environment for all teams involved, right?
Right. And to that point, I've talked with players who have simply gone home. Some of the West Coast players in teams that were based in LA have flown home. I believe Spart, Blast have gone home. A bunch of folks are like, why be here if West Coast is at such a obvious disadvantage in this current setup for online? Why would you stay there? So it might be interesting that teams might simply be just saying like, go home. But yeah, it's a huge hurdle to get across, because you look at what happened with Apathy and Seattle Surge when they were playing Paris. You could see him in real time rubber banding on the map. I think we mentioned that before. You could see issues happening with the Gorillas, and I think we'll touch on this, so I won't say too much about it now, but of course with Aqua disconnecting and Paris, and obviously it was a widespread enough issue across enough teams and players that it clearly is real in some sense, as opposed to just one team or one player complaining. It's clearly an actual issue that needs to get resolved, because then how do you look at, I guess, the integrity of outcomes at that point? Like, is Seattle crappy at S&D? Yeah, but did their server issues potentially sway things at all? Who knows at that point? It just becomes a question mark, right? Every outcome becomes a question mark.
And Emily, Ray said this in our coach's corner. He didn't go so far as to say that that was the reason. He would never say that. But he did stress that that is a concern for any team, in particular, though, his team, based on the fact that the team is in Dallas. And geographically, that is a disadvantage for the Empire versus the rest of the teams that are competing simply because of where the servers might be. Right. Yeah. So when you look back at this weekend with the Florida Mutineers finally climbing that mountain, they've been in the finals before. They've had a lot of storylines around them, and they finally get this tournament win, this weekend win. And even putting aside the whether this counts as a championship, etc., we can get to that a little bit later. But is there an asterisk beside their victory here?
I mean, that's tough, right? Because I don't want to take away anything from Florida either. I think that especially in the final, like we heard Saint talk about it, I believe, in the VO, and I talked about it with a few players as well. I also have talked to Florida about it in interviews that are going to come out. I think they prepared really well, especially for the finals, in terms of map vetoes and how they wanted to approach that match. However, it's like a really tough position to be in, right? Because on the one hand, I don't want to take away anything from Florida, because I do think they prepared, and I do think they performed as best they could. Do I think that the online server issues affected the performance of some teams? Yeah, for sure. Like, do I think that Seattle's S&D would magically be good if they played on, like perfect servers, no issues? No, I think they'd still have issues in that. But I can't say definitively that, especially with so many close matches, like we had a lot of close, like 3-2s, right? Mm-hmm. It's difficult to say that the competitive integrity of this tournament was fair across the board. Like, I don't think that's something you can say. And I do want to be able to like compartmentalize that somehow. Like that's what I've been struggling with. And again, I wrote about this in our roundtable as well. Like you really have to struggle with, like, because you don't want to take away all the good stuff that Florida did like visibly do at this tournament. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, like, if you're comparing this to a LAN event from earlier this year, where does that fit in? If you're comparing it to a chip from last year, where does that fit in? Like, I do think this is, if you're making that comparison, it is a slightly lesser competitive tournament, unfortunately.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. And you look at Florida. Did Pharaoh play out of his mind?
Yeah, he was
absolutely.
Nuts.
And did Florida look great? Absolutely. But was this online? Yeah. Were there exactly everything that Emily said? I don't need to reiterate all of it. It does kind of have those asterisks tacked on to it. which is it's a bummer though. I mean, because you don't want that. You want to see clean wins and everything else. But yeah, definitely asterisks. But also, Arda, to your point earlier, and I was saying this consistently through my watch parties all weekend, was that you got to be forgiving and you got to give some breathing room to CDL right now, especially for this first weekend, because they're going to have all of those issues. You can't smooth them all out beforehand. And we'll see what they improve going into Chicago, April 24th to 26th. But yeah, to both your points, like, yes, asterisks. Also, yes, give them a little bit of leeway while they figure things out.